All right. Kia ora, good morning. As I said, my name is Jacob. I work for Thinks Canary, and today we'll be discussing the back and forth between the people who are building tools for fishers and building tools to catch fishers or detect phishing and stop it. This is fitting, as my intro said. I've just come from Nelson, which is the largest fishing capital in New Zealand, and so kind of felt like I had to give that talk. So I know it's the morning, we want to dive right into it, but I want to ask you all a question. When I say the word phishing, what thought or emotion pops into your head? Perhaps, like me, when you started out, I thought it was kind of boring, something that happened in the back, but only gullible people would fall for, and then it's kind of remained static since the days of, hosted PayPal sites or sending out malware that says, check out this cool thing, double click on it, please. Maybe, if you're younger than me, or you run an organization that has lots of users, maybe who are not quite so tech savvy, it's a pretty scary thing that you're seeing for real every day, and that there's nothing that can be done. Now, what I'd like to try to do with my talk is to say that maybe it's a dynamic and fast-paced changing environment where there is activity both from the defenders and the attackers that's in this ever-evolving and rapid game of cat and mouse, just like our friends Tom and Jerry. Now, I know for many of you it's early. I have a toddler, so it's not early. But if you're going to nod off, if you're going to slip out to enjoy the awesome Kawaiicon stuff, there's 3 words that I'd like for you to write down on your notes or in your Google Keep or wherever you take notes, so that Monday morning when your boss says, "What did you do on Friday? Why did we expense that?" You can say device-bound passkeys, device-bound passkeys, and they'll say, "What is that?" And say, "You know what? This is the only silver bullet to really stop phishing, and we're going to deploy them across our organization. We're going to mandate their use." So, now that we've gotten your true value out of this conversation, we're going to move on to our agenda. Now, like all good talks, there's a beginning, which inevitably moves to the middle, and sadly, the end. So, getting to the real beginning is the abridged ancient history of phishing. Sadly, it's really tough for me to put the word ancient history on things that I was around for and I remember. I actually sent the lovebug virus to everyone in my contacts because I thought it was so cool that you double-click this email and little fireworks and hearts showed up. I only found out that it was a virus when I sent it to a friend who was running a Mac, and it was all corrupted, and he tried really hard to get it to run, and it wouldn't work. What's interesting to note here is that early on in the 90s and the early 2000s, a lot of the emphasis on phishing was, here's a good file, click on that good file and do something. And while there were a few things, so after 9/11, there was a phishing attempt for eGold, which is an old service that I don't think many people remember. Basically, it was like the precursor to Bitcoin, where you could own some gold in a vault somewhere. And that was an ID verification, credential spam, phishing attack, as well as some fake PayPal. But for the most part, computers back in those days had pretty poor endpoint protection, even worse than now. For the younger folks in the audience. And malicious attachments were super easy to spread. You download something or you compile it in Turbo Delphi or Turbo Pascal or whatever the hip language you were using at the time was. You'd email it to people and then they would email it along. I mean, there's still chain letters going around where if you don't forward it to all your friends, something very bad will happen to you. Also, hosting servers back then in the era of dial-up. So I grew up in even more rural Vermont, and so we had dial-up until high school, basically. I was not going to be hosting a good replica of PayPal.com in my basement on a 28K modem. And that showed that even up until 2010, I was shocked at the statistic that 99% of phishing sites were still running HTTP only. Because back then, you had to pay for certificates, which is lame and expensive. You also had to usually show some form of identity to get, if you said you were PayPal.com, you had to give them your business license. And so it was really difficult to set up those infrastructure. And for the most part, a lot of it was a relatively static mirror of whatever site you were trying to mimic. which could raise suspicion as you had a user who was clicking through beyond the login page because things kind of stopped working. You didn't actually log into PayPal and see your balance. You just kind of got redirected to a site that stole your credentials, and that was a bit suspicious. So that was then. This is now. Now deploying phishing infrastructure is super easy, right? Domains are free, basically. Subdomains are free. SSL certificates is like, what, 3 seconds with Let's Encrypt these days. They're really easy, and the phishing kit developers have made them super easy, like DevOps for attackers. Download a repo, run a Docker command, update your config script, and boom, you now have a management platform that can orchestrate everything from sending the emails out to users, generating unique lures to make sure that you're not getting caught up by the good guys, and then stealing your sessions, doing a nice smooth handoff so that the users don't even necessarily realize they've been phished. And we've also seen another change is endpoint protection has improved, and we've consolidated our identities, right? The era of single sign-on, SAML, OAuth, all those types of things. We're seeing now a rise in credential phishing rather than just, here's a piece of very good software to double-click that I've emailed to you. And obviously, Google Workspace, Microsoft Entra ID and M365, Okta, all those are the kind of the big targets, right? And it's now more than 80% of all phishing is going after credential theft. It's also, shockingly, become the #1 initial entry vector for modern breaches. And so I want to think a little bit about why that is and maybe wax poetic about that. And this is a picture from the Microsoft shared responsibility model. Most of the big vendors have something like this, and you'll see where the dark blue is the customer's responsibility and the light blue is Microsoft or the vendor's responsibility. And you'll see that the seam where those meet is identity and authentication. And whenever you have two people responsible for the same task, whenever this meme applies to a security boundary, it's going to be difficult, and attackers are exploiting that seam. There is very coarse-grained ways for you to communicate as a tenant owner to Microsoft. For example, you can use conditional access policies that let you say, this is the type of user that I want to let in, but that's about it, and that's a pretty coarse-grained technique. Microsoft, which has all the raw telemetry of everyone attacking their login page, they have that, but they don't know what you're supposed to expect outside of that coarse-grained policy. You don't see that raw telemetry. All you get is someone did or did not log into your account, which, depending on the state of Azure DNS, may take minutes, hours, days to show up. And so there is this kind of difference in visibility and also the ability to clearly communicate what you're expecting from both sides. And I think this is where attackers love to be because, again, it's a little bit of finger pointing. And so that's led to the rise of these modern phishing techniques. We're going to talk about 3 today, the first being browser in the browser, the second browser in the middle, and then finally adversary in the middle, which is the one that we'll mostly be talking about today. So the first, browser in the middle, is essentially amazing JavaScript and CSS that makes this look like you're actually opening up a browser, you're logging into Microsoft. If you were to click the little lock icon on that window that's popped up, it'd say this is a valid Microsoft certificate. There is no browser window. That is purely front-end magic. To someone who doesn't know JavaScript or CSS very much, that is, to me, magic. They even grab the theme of your operating system. So if you're running a Mac, it will look more like a Mac version. If you're running in dark mode, it'll look like dark mode. Pretty incredible stuff. If you want to go one step further, so some of the defenses around this is frame-breaking attacks, where they essentially redirect you to try to make sure that you're not running in an iframe. So this is where you essentially, as an attacker, spin up a headless Chrome or other browser running in kiosk mode in your infrastructure. The user goes there and is streaming this over NoVNC or Guacamole or any of the other like web-based RDP type protocols. This one was kind of originally released by Mr. Docs. And so this right here is eventually me browsing to this VM as a VNC client, which is then browsing to the Entra ID site. And this right here has a keylogger installed. It's dumping all of the sessions and all the cookies. And so they are essentially the ones logging in. to Microsoft's side, it looks like a legitimate Chrome login. There's nothing fishy going on. Ha, fishy. But it's just, essentially I'm remote controlling that browser. And then lastly, adversary in the middle. This is essentially a reverse proxy where an adversary spins up a server that acts as a proxy between the victim user and the target site, with a couple rewrite rules, which are in many cases called fishlets, that basically say when you see this string or this regular expression, replace it with this, and then basically pass that request through. And these work really well, they scale really well, and they are pretty impressive, honestly, because a lot of people actually have corporate proxies, and so to be able to support enterprise logins, a lot of these sites allow logins with proxies, and so if it's just the attacker running the proxy, then you're in big trouble. All of this has valid TLS certificates because you're connecting to that proxy server, and they have a domain for that, and they have an SSL certificate for it, and then they're connecting with a valid TLS certificate as well. So you may be saying, aha, well, this is where MFA comes into play, because that means even if my credentials get phished, it doesn't matter because I have something that I have, not just something that I know. Unfortunately, as you see here, a lot of the popular types of MFA are still phishable. And once you get a session token, they can last a lot. And some of the detections around like sessions moving very quickly don't work because there is a lot of natural movement where someone is tethered to their phone and it shows up that they're in Auckland, and then they get home and now their browser is showing up in Wellington. Is that a permitted move? Maybe they're VPNing to a company headquarters in Australia, they turn off the VPN and now they're connecting somewhere else. So it's frustrating that a lot of the MFA types, especially the ones that if you create a new Entra ID tenant in Microsoft, they say you should use the Microsoft Authenticator app, are not phishing resistant. And so these are phishable, and I'll go through a little bit about them, except for, you'll notice, the two bottom ones, the device-bound passkeys. You remember that device-bound passkeys from before? So keep that in mind. Who here has heard of Thinks Canary? Just a show of hands. Cool. For those who don't know, we make canary tokens and other deception-y things and honeypots. And so this is way out of our wheelhouse, like doing phishing stuff. What you may not know is that one of our first canary tokens is a JavaScript snippet that you put in your website source, and if it's ever loaded from not your domain, it gives you an alert. And this is pretty cool. You can see like when someone mirrors your website and it's running from /users/desktop/bob/ .html, and then you see when it's popped up at bob.com. That's great. But most popular phishing services, because of this shared responsibility model, don't let you YOLO JavaScript up on their login page to be served from a signed origin that is Microsoft. And so because of that, our ability to detect and get visibility at the seam is limited. However, the good news that we kind of built with this token is that CSS is supported to do corporate branding and make your login page look more like what you expect. As a quick background, just 101, when your browser goes to a website, it gets the HTML or whatever it is, and in that website, as long as you're in this century, it will have JavaScript, images, and CSS. When it goes out to fetch those additional resources, it will include a header that says, hey, I'm coming from this master page, and I want this thing. It can be the domain, it can be the full URL, it can be including the parameters, and that's set by either the browser configuration or another header called the refer policy that instructs the browser how much to leak or how private to be. So with that in mind, we can give an owner of a tenant a little snippet of CSS. And so in this case, we'll say enter ID. When the user goes to enter ID in the happy case, they get the CSS. It's hosted by them because it's safe. There's a little URL link for an invisible feature on the page that you can't see. It's going to send the refer saying, hey, I just came from login.microsoftonline.com. And our CloudFront, which is a CDN that Amazon provides, which is a pretty normal place to be hosting images, is actually running a CloudFront function, like a super, super lightweight Lambda. And it's saying, hey, you're coming from Login Microsoft Online. That's cool. Here's this one-by-one image that you're never going to look at. Now, if you were to throw an adversary in the middle proxy, what's going to happen is the user is going to go to that site, and it's going to proxy the request to enter ID. It's going to make those rewrite rules. It's going to come back. They want to represent the same branding, the same look and feel. And so they will send that CSS back to the client, because otherwise it would look weird if you have a company branding for whatever your company is, and then when you log in on this site, it just has the generic Microsoft M365 look. In this case, now you're going to be going back to CloudFront to fetch the image resource. Your referrer is going to be bad.com or whatever it is. And now we can actually issue a redirect to our Canary token server, which will trigger an alert to your tenant owner, all before the user's ever typed in their password. This happens at the moment that you enter a valid username for a tenant. And so this is a really quick video. You don't actually have to read the text. This is just showing Evil Jinx, which is really slick. You just quick run. You can create and orchestrate your different targets and the lures you're going to generate for, which sites you're going to be phishing, what are the rewrite rules you want to apply for those. And now you see that I've generated a lure in this video. We run it, and it looks like a legit login for Microsoft. You won't be able to read this because it's tiny, but on the right, you can trust me, or you can see it later if you'd like. When you enter the username for our tenant, it's going to both load the CSS, which is indicated by, of course, what more than a cat picture showing up as the background, and then we're going to see a request both to Amazon CDN as well as the Canary token server. And so when you log in, you see a cat's behind, and request with the 302 redirect the Canary token server. We've already alerted at this point before the password's been put in. So that was, in the grand scheme of things, kind of old news. That was released last year. How it's going, honestly, this blew away my expectations. I think I lied to you in the abstract. We were serving 100 requests per second. We're now north of 200 requests per second. So in the time that I've been on this slide, we've already protected over 1,000 logins, which is pretty wild. And just a side note to talk about something that's going to come up later, 99.9% of them have a referrer set. And the cool thing with CloudFront, it's pretty cheap. Protecting all those million logins is like a few $100 a month, which is great. We are catching dozens of unique domains every week, and of those, about half of them, the TLS certificate for that domain was issued the day we caught them. So I would expect that some of those are an attacker testing their infrastructure and then burning their infrastructure as they test it, which brings me great joy. 3/4 of that in the first week. It's free, it's easy to deploy, it's open source. It's great. And I think it provides that extra visibility in that scene. You're getting a little bit of that every request to login.microsoft, more so than if you're just relying on Azure sign-in logs. And so, look at that. We're done. Happy days. We're all great. Let's go have a beer. Unfortunately, this talk is about the dynamicism between offense and defense. Now, I would have loved it if all the people that were building fish kits also were out having a beer and relaxing. Unfortunately, they've been busy as well. So Cuba Gretzky, who builds the Evil Jinx tool, he released a new version of Evil Jinx earlier this year called Evil Jinx Pro, which is a paid version, which I actually think is great because it means that it's going to be more vetted red teamers using it rather than random people who can check out a Git repo. This has two kind of features. One is they add a refer policy header to their fish sites as they fly by, which tells the browser, don't send the refer out because that would be a privacy invasion, which means that we're now blinded by that. Amusingly, there was a many-year-old Chrome bug where Chrome was ignoring this header and still fetching it anyways. And so, sadly, the Chrome team, after 3 years, decided to fix this bug right when he released this new phishing kit. So, sad face. And then also, for those of you who are not running the $1,500 US a year subscription for the Pro version and you're still stuck on the version 3 from GitHub, he released a bunch of specific evasions to add to your fish list. your fishlet configuration, that if they see our CloudFront domain, to basically rewrite it to nothing at nothing. And so again, blinding us because now the request is being rewritten. Now we're sad. There's a few small wins. The first one, which is probably not going to last very long, which is why I call it a small win. You'll notice if you were to go to our website and generate one of these right now, CloudFront.net doesn't show up in that CSS. There's no CloudFront.net to match against. So CSS allows you to replace the Unicode character with its / escaped hex code. And so we randomly do that throughout our strings. It's petty, yes. It's probably not going to last very long, yes. But it is pretty fun to essentially be exploiting a parser differential between your browser and the fish kit. Another small one is another show of hands. Who here browses the internet regularly in full screen mode? Not maximized, but like, this is full screen mode, there is no OS. All right, there's one person. Maybe two people. It was a little bit like half a hand. Okay, and for you two, do you usually do that when you log into your IDP for your corporate job? No. Okay, great. If you did, I had some words about it. Now I can say those people who do that would be insane. Thank you for not being insane and ruining the joke. Since nobody browses the internet, especially to their IDP for their work in full screen mode, it does mean that we can actually detect if you're running in kiosk mode and catch browser in the middle. So they have to run the Chromium version as a kiosk browser. Otherwise, you'd get the browser bar and then the other browser bar, and you'd be a little suspicious, or at least I would be. And so you can add custom CSS that is only called and catches a different URL when there is when it's running in full screen mode. And so we can essentially serve a slightly different URL, and we can catch an alert on people in browser in the middle. Again, relatively small win. Sadly, the attackers have had some big wins. Is anyone here at DEF CON this year? I wasn't, but there was a cool talk you should definitely go check out. Kiana Nice, he's a Belgian security researcher. He gave a talk on how to phish users in Entra ID while keeping them entirely on Entra ID's login page. It is very targeted, I will say, and so it's still like, the room is not quite on fire, but it is very targeted and it's very cool. And I do want to just run through it because it's super big props to him. It was really clever. So also to show this is a pretty targeted attack. So first thing you do when you want to attack someone is you buy a domain that's like one letter off from theirs. So in this case, micro-oft.com. Then, since that's your domain, you can set up an Entra ID tenant for it. And Microsoft allows you to pass through to a legacy on-prem Active Directory server. Then you install malware on that Active Directory server that you control that dumps all the credentials that are being passed to it. So now when someone logs into your attacker credential server, your tenant, those credentials will show up on your malware server because you installed the malware yourself. Then you build a custom font. This is brilliant. CSS lets you add custom fonts. And so you can, for your tenant, your attacker tenant, you can build a custom font that replaces whatever letters off you were. So in this case, the hyphen glyph is represented right there. It's just a curly hyphen, a very long curly hyphen. You add that to your tenant. If you want to bypass MFA, you create another tenant, and you create all possible MFA token values, which are dynamically served. A lot of work. The end result, super impressive. Like, unless you are so paranoid that you check you're on login microsoftonline.com, the certificate is valid, unless you're going and URL unescaping some random parameters that are far off your screen, or you're getting this admin@microsoft.com email address and copying that into another font or a notepad, it is brilliant, right? So, again, big win for attackers. Sad for us. We're not going to see that because you're actually logging into the attacker's tenant. We have no idea that you're not logging into ours. And it's just worth putting this kind of into a timeline. And so our token was released early last year. Early this year, Evil Jinx Pro came out, which, again, hides the refers and beats that. I colored this both red and blue because, yes, it's an privacy fix, but it's kind of sad for us. So Chrome fixed that in, I think, June. We released our CSS encoding little petty thing in July, and then Phishing from Entra was released in August. And just the same timeline, just to help with a sense of scale, this is all like the last year and a half. And then if you go back to ancient history, this is what that last year and a half looks like, not even to scale with the other events that I showed on that early second or third slide is. And so you can see that in this long history of phishing, the last thing has been blow by blow, like almost every month there's been a counterpoint between attackers and defense for something that in my mind was a fixed thing that is like kind of a low effort, not a big deal. So in conclusion, device-bound passkeys. The time to move to phishing-resistant MFA is now. No user awareness training or any detection, our token included, is going to be the silver bullet that a cryptographic method can provide. Especially user awareness training if you can log in and phish from the login Microsoft page. Now, that said, there is a lag between what red teamers can present at DEF CON and what their tools are that are thousands of dollars a year, and what an average Joe attacker uses. We see a lot, because we're catching them almost every day, of completely nonsense domains, not even trying to look like anything. It's just random on the keyboard, .xyz, spin up an open source version of EvilJinx 2, see how long they can last, and then they go and they do it again. And we know that it's fairly low effort because EvilJinx 2 and 3 actually has a pull request for a patch that fixes the referrer bug. And it's been there since 2020, and it's never been merged or used. And so the fact that we're still seeing EvilJinx today means that they're pretty low effort of just downloading. I think, obviously, these low effort attacks over time will get better. They'll get better kit. I think that for now, our token is still valuable. If you run an Azure tenant and you want to deploy this, you get more visibility at that seam between your responsibility and your vendor's responsibility. Obviously, the pace of advancement seems to be increasing in the sense that it is like month by month. And I think that the PhishKit developers are active, and they're actually making this into their living of building these tools, not just deploying these tools. And then the last note, again bringing it back to the shared responsibility model, is that there is a cost that is often overlooked and sometimes difficult to quantify of the loss of visibility when you do outsource some of your things, especially your security boundary. It may save you a lot of money. It may be great because now you have managed IDPs, but there is something that's worth talking about when you are deciding, I'm going to take a large part of my business or my business continuity, and I'm going to go give it to someone else, because you are losing that. Detection engineering is a lot harder when you don't actually have the access logs, because Microsoft only gives you the sign-on logs after an attempt has been made, and so you kind of lose that wide aperture. So with that, thank you. If you're interested in Canary tokens, either this one, we also give out for free credit card numbers that you can use, AWS keys, random files. If they're ever opened, used, or accessed, you get an alert. And that's either available for free at canarytokens.org, or you can host your own if you don't trust us. Though now thinking about that, you can either run our code on your system if you don't trust us, or you can just use this one. And then another plug, I release this quarterly newsletter where we scour like all thousands of talks, presentations, papers, and blog posts in the information security research. We pick between 15 and 20 of them that we think are either showing a new area that's really worthwhile or a new momentum in an existing field. And we look for themes on that. And so that's called Thinkscapes. You can get that at thinks.com/TS, again, for free. Of course, a talk like this, where I am talking about other people's things, I can't be up here without saying this talk is building on all of their work. And I will be posting all these slides, so the links will be clickable. So first off, Quarks Lab had a great blog on different types of phishing techniques, and from a red teamer's view, and which ones they should go for. There's Cuba Gretzky's Wise Fisherman Never Trust the Weather, which is basically his rebuttal to our token. That was a talk he gave at X33FCon in Poland. Obviously, there's the DEF CON talk from Keanu about phishing from the Microsoft page. And then there's some interesting kind of corporate-y blogs, like Microsoft's response to adversary-in-the-middle phishing, and like the more government-y things of how you should be doing it and why you should be deploying device-bound passkeys. So with that, I am seeing a red flashing number up here. So thank you very much. Enjoy your morning tea.